thinking about some of the technologies like AI, but more importantly, how do we apply them for good and specifically for sustainability? I'm going to drill it down a little bit to some of the tangible things that we're looking at inside the country, and really, why is this so hard, and what do we need to do now? Why is it the time for action? This next video is just going to do a quick timeline horizon around the other industrial revolutions to kind of remind us a little bit over time how long these have taken. So watch the timeline on the bottom for each of the previous industrial revolutions, and you'll get a sense of how long they were and then how compressed the timeline is now. See, most of us are alive now. This last sentence was the one that got our attention. How do we avoid a world of joblessness, low productivity, and social inequality? So a lot of what we're talking about today is to try and discuss those issues around technology is great. I'm a bit of a technologist by trade. I don't know that I would call myself a futurist, but nonetheless. So thinking about how do we do technology for good and be smart about how we implement it. We're at the first time ever in the history of Canada where if we don't change the productivity and innovation agenda, the next generation will have a worse quality of life than we do. This is Clayton Christensen's definition of disruption. Process by which product or service takes root initially in simple applications at the bottom end of a market and ultimately moves up market, displacing established competitors. So this is a quick little neuroscience lesson, minor, quick little neuroscience lesson around why this is so hard to actually adopt and address these changes quickly enough. So exponential technologies is what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So artificial intelligence, IoT, all of those sorts of things. So here's the problem. Our brains are trained to think linearly. We have decades, if not centuries, of burning in thinking linearly, okay? And here's the problem. If a technology or a capability is on an exponential curve, at the front end of that curve, it looks linear. 0.01, 0.02, 0.04. Our brains do exactly that. They extrapolate it and say, this is a linear trend, I get it. And so we start thinking about whether it's thinking about the environment, whether it's thinking about the adoption of AI, all of these different things, we actually think it's going to go on a linear trend. And so we're developing our policies on that pace. We're developing our technology. We're developing our training. We're developing our education in our universities on that trend. The problem, of course, is if the actual technology is on an exponential trend, you're left behind. If you're in the corporate world, this is Blockbuster and that's Netflix, right? So this is really problematic for us to understand. It's problematic for our policymakers. It's problematic for our people that are governing our organizations, whether it's the government or the private sector. So we looked at a whole bunch of different change enablers. These are some of the technologies and capabilities that are on an exponential curve, ranging from AI that we're going to talk a lot about today, IoT, fintech, solar, clean tech, et cetera. So all of these are kind of on that curve, and we looked at that in terms of trying to wake up the country. By the way, when we did our study 2 years ago to look at Canadian organizations' preparedness for this, we ask simple questions. Are you aware of the technologies? Do you have a strategy for them? And are you investing in them? 13%, 13% of our Canadian companies were actually aware of the technologies, had a strategy, and were investing. So we'll call those highly prepared based on their own assessment. 35% had no clue. So this is why this is a bit of a call to action for the country. Hot topic these days, especially, autonomous cars. And this is, very, very interesting. So it's got the potential to impact all kinds of industries, right? Insurance, infrastructure, parking, car manufacturing, lots of different stuff. Interesting though, these are the dates that each of the car manufacturers say they'll be ready for autonomous driven vehicles. 2018 with Tesla, Waymo, etc. 2020, and so it goes. Here's another kind of curve on the exponentials. When I started doing some of these talks 3 years ago, we talked with all the manufacturers and all the experts in the space, and their projection 3 years ago, right, 2015, was that autonomous vehicles would be 2050 or never. 2050 or never. In 3 years, we've accelerated that timeline 3 decades. Ollie is probably something that you haven't heard about. So as we think about smart cities and the capabilities that we have here, it's not just about individual passenger cars. It's about broader kinds of vehicles. This is a company that actually crowdsourced their design and came up and said, here's what it looks like. So they can do a passenger vehicle that could have very different types and shapes, right? Moving people around in a particular city.
Ollie, why don't you say hello?
Hi everyone, my name is Ollie. I'm a self-driving vehicle powered by IBM Watson technology.
While I can see in 360 degrees and can make decisions hundreds of times faster than you, I am monitored at all times by a central human operator.
Pretty interesting. That entire vehicle was 3D printed. The entire vehicle. And so you start to think about, how does this change how we design cities? How does it change how we design campuses for universities? What kind of transportation do we need? Very, very interesting in the mix, and I think can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, et cetera. So behavioral psychology is going to be a big deal in terms of how we think about some of these changes that we need to make. What's interesting in the energy dialogue, and Canada's caught in the vortex of this based on our history, is a lot of people talk about our reserves that we've got. So if you look at world energy consumption, 16 terawatts, coal, uranium, oil, natural gas, we have lots of reserves to produce those, but as we all know, very dirty sources, very expensive sources to get out. We're producing pollution as we create those, so lots of greenhouse gas emissions. What's interesting, and this is the challenge of some of the renewables, is fairly small amounts currently in terms of availability, whether it's wind or biomass, etc. The big one, though, in this mix is the sun. The challenge with energy is less about the generation and more about the storage and where you can actually consume it. And you start to look at batteries. So this is an interesting trend. So the best experts in the world, in the US, on energy consumption said, if you look at that orange line coming down that's got the blue circle around it, that's what the Energy Information Administration in the US thought the projection on battery costs was going to be. Along comes Tesla, fundamentally changes the game on batteries and drops it dramatically. So again, the best experts in the world couldn't predict the level of innovation that we were going to see. So this is why we have to be tracking, monitoring, figuring out which things are on an exponential curve, which things are not.
This seemingly innocuous rural area in South Australia has suddenly become home to one of the biggest sources of renewable energy in the world, built in 60 days. The US technology company Tesla has built the largest ever lithium-ion battery, which is plugged into the power grid in the state of South Australia. The state's premier unveiled the giant battery, which is powered by a nearby wind farm.
This is an example of South Australia leading the world's largest lithium-ion battery. It's right here in Jamestown in South Australia, and it's already supplying power to the national electricity market.
Australia is a major exporter of coal and is considered one of the world's worst greenhouse gas polluters. The state of South Australia is demolishing its coal-fired power stations and switching to renewable energy. That's imperative after a freak storm last year caused a statewide blackout, highlighting the unreliable supply of electricity. The billionaire business tycoon Elon Musk offered to build the battery.
The most salient point here is that this system will be three times more powerful than any system on Earth. This is not like a minor foray into the frontier. This is like, going 3 times further than anyone's gone before.
Musk also promised that if it wasn't completed on time, it would be free. Lucky for him, the $40 million project was switched on ahead of schedule.
So you start to see, now we're solving the battery problems. That's one of the last miles in terms of renewable energies. We have to be able to capture it, but we also have to be able to store it and then deliver it when we need it. You have to actually get your hands dirty with a lot of the technologies and the capabilities. So we talk about experiential learning. We create a little constructive disruptor roadmap. Here are some things that you should try. Very different ways of thinking about the problems as we go forward. But it is interesting as we think about all of these technologies, how can they go sideways and how can they go positive?